This talk, we're going to go with the third mind. We're going to be exploring the third mind. Great, I'm just checking if you can hear me. I see some yeses, fantastic. The comments are coming in now. All right. And by the way, thank you all for your questions. I received a ton of questions in the ensuing week since the last broadcast. And I tried to reply to as many as I could. I know there were a lot I did not. But we are going to actually address right at the top here some of the questions that have been building up since last week before we go into the third mind here. I also heard from you that the pause format is working well, right? So that's going to be something that we are continuing. Remember that when we are talking, when we're having this conversation, the most important thing that's happening is your awareness. It is your awareness that's the most important thing happening, not these words, not the things happening around you, but the awareness in which all this content is arriving to you and being processed by you. This is the most prominent thing, because depending on this awareness and the configuration of that mind, things are perceived and understood differently. So with that, let's begin with a pause here. And remember, the purpose of this pause is to bring the awareness that we have into the foreground. Usually, the content is mesmerizing. The words and the sights and the sounds, okay, that's all good. We can use those. However, our insight into those, our ability to see and recognize into what is being said and what is happening right now depends on the awareness. So let's take a moment and bring this awareness into the foreground. Okay, so let's recap the first and second mind, and then I want to address some of these questions. I picked out a few questions. The first mind, what is it? It is the localized sense of identity. It is the feeling that what we are is localized and restricted to a body, and the feeling that we are residing as or within the body. Okay, so the sharp sense of boundary, the stark sense of boundary and limitation is the first mind. What are the implications of the first mind? There are many. The major one is that as I see myself, so I see the world. So our premise here is that consciousness is fundamental, and when this consciousness appears as in the form of the first mind, then it superimposes that limitation, it superimposes that restriction, that outline onto this consciousness that is here, which then appears as discrete and distinct objects. Right? So we are bridging the world and our own experience. This is really the power of the three minds formulation, the three minds perspective, is that there's no longer any separation now of understanding the world out there as something and then myself. What does my journey have to do with what the world is? How is it that consciousness is fundamental because stuff looks like objects to me? All of these things get reconciled. Okay, so the implication of the first mind, as I am, so I see the world. Then what is the second mind? When that sense of contraction loosens, right? When the sense of boundary starts to dissolve, then that vision and the experience of identity can no longer be restricted by a body or a personal mind, right? And the first mind, these are my thoughts, my feelings. The way my thoughts are, I am. The way my feelings are, I am. In the second mind recognizes that which is appearing as this, which is consciousness. All right, so the second mind is consciousness recognizing itself and its fluxing nature, its vibrating nature as the world of form and function. So forms and functions are no longer distinct, they're no longer fixed, they're no longer non-negotiable in a sense. They are recognized as a reflection in consciousness. So the second mind sees itself, this consciousness. Which consciousness? This consciousness, which is here. That which is here right now, not just in meditation, not just in altered states, that which is here right now. This consciousness is then recognized as the forming, informing, and deforming world. The world of forms, informing and deforming. This dance. This is the second mind. Hello, Spain, London, Brazil, Australia. Thank you all for joining. So with that, let's go into a few questions. Okay, and then we'll talk about the third mind. These questions are from last week. Some of the questions I couldn't respond to during the week. So here are some of the ones that I think will shed some of the most light onto these issues. Okay, one is, what is the purpose of the body if the being is separate and eternal? Seems that it broke up. I'm not sure why it's doing that. Okay, so what is the purpose of the body if the being is separate and eternal? Right, now the key here is to recognize that this body that we're talking about appears separate only through this first mind perspective. Okay, this body, the question is, what is the purpose of the body if the being is separate and eternal? And what I'm saying is that the being appears separate and the body appears separate only from the first mind perspective. So what is here right now is consciousness. And it can appear as though the first mind, and through that first mind lens, the body appears as something distinct, as a particular form. Right? So it is not that the body is different and the being is different. That's simply one way in which consciousness is interpreted and perceived. All right, so the purpose of the body in the first mind is separate. It might be to keep it healthy, to use it as a vehicle, and so on, right? In the second mind, the very same body is perceived as a stream of sensations, right? As thoughts. Just like we have thoughts that arise and thoughts that fade, similarly, the body can be a series of thoughts, a series of perceptions that arise and fade, and arise and fade. Right now, think about the body that you have. How much of your body are you perceiving? You're probably not perceiving the back of your head, the bottom of your feet. Probably not perceiving a lot of the internal mechanisms that are happening in the body. So what is this body that we perceive? It's a stream of intermittent perceptions, sensations, or awarenesses, right? So what is the purpose of the body if the being is separate? Let's address the assumption itself. The being is not separate. It is the being itself which appears through lenses as a solidified physical body. All right. Next question is, how does looking inwards, or the experience of the inner self, help to dissolve this boundary? All right. How does looking inwards help to dissolve this boundary? Which boundary is this? This is the boundary between the first and the second mind. And here again, what happens is when we bring attention to this boundary, right? what happens is we are summoning a deeper level of intelligence. All right? A deeper level of intelligence is being summoned. And when we access that, that in itself changes the experience of identity. So when we go inwards, and let's say we're meditating and we relax, the sense of boundary around the individual, the sense of individuality starts to soften, starts to dissolve. And that in itself helps to recognize this broader consciousness that is here. All right, so that is how looking inwards. First of all, the attention is directed outwards, right, to the outer world. That's the way we're raised in the society. That's why we call it the first mind. Initially, we're trained to look outwards and to see the outer world. Then there comes a point in a person's life when they say, wait a second, there's more to this life. Now let me start looking inwards. And in looking inwards, one starts to detect this sense of limitation and boundary. We become much more sensitive to it. And in doing that, we go beyond the sense of boundary, right? So the first stage is outwardly directed. The second stage is inwardly directed. And then there's the dissolution of boundary, in which now we're no longer out-in oriented, externally, internally oriented. Rather, that very sense of boundary goes away. All right, so this is how looking inwards helps. It starts moving that progression from outward recognition to inner recognition. All right, then here's a great question. Isn't this too theoretical? Is this too theoretical? And here's the thing about this. It depends on one's own recognition, how much one has recognized. So the idea of the three minds is to recognize where I am, where my sense of identity is, and that's for every I, each person. We recognize where the sense of identity is, and then we can use that to see how the identity changes and also recognize how our perception of the world is changing, right? So if I understand it only as a concept without applying it to my own experience, then it becomes a theory like anything else, and it becomes another obstacle, right? The purpose is not only to understand it intellectually, but to match what we are talking about to our own experience. And that's why we're using these pauses. So we're using our own awareness, and now we're seeing how this awareness can appear constricted or feel constricted as the first mind and give this experience of the world. And then this our own awareness, which is right here, how can it shift to give a different experience of what I am and what this world is? This is really the use of the three minds format. All right. And then would first mind contain the ego? So the ego is a very popular concept in spirituality. Yes, the first mind includes the ego. The ego, again, is that sense of individuality. The ego is that sense of constriction, right? A sense of separateness. Let's take a moment now to feel the boundaries of the individual. Okay, we're going to take a pause, and let's use this moment to bring our awareness to the forefront first. Let's do that. And now that this awareness is in the forefront, let's use this awareness and feel as the personality comes back in. All right? Recognize the boundary, the sense of outline around the personality. And you'll recognize that as that comes in, the world of objects also becomes more distinct. Okay, so first mind, yes, it contains the ego. And the first mind also recognizes that this ego that we're talking about, its boundary itself is reflected as the world of objects. All right. Now, one person said, feeling the world is overwhelming. Feeling the world is overwhelming. Yes, I understand exactly what that means. Sometimes being in the ER when people are coming in because of pain, because of suffering, it can be overwhelming, the amount of suffering that's happening. So what do we do here? Feeling the world is overwhelming so long as the sense of identity isn't rooted and established in this second mind configuration. Yeah? Feeling the world is overwhelming so long as I'm seeing a world out there and I'm seeing thing by thing, event by event, feeling by feeling, person by person. And in doing this, the individual, myself, also gets overwhelmed because there's innumerable things. There's an infinite number of things, events in the world, right? And experiencing more and more of that as a person becomes more sensitive can be overwhelming. Now, the thing is, when that identity opens up and is established as that second mind, then it's not that being overwhelmed goes away, but that aspect of the identity that is overwhelmed is not the only aspect that is functional, that is operational, right? That aspect, the individual aspect that is functioning in the world, that is experiencing things, including suffering, including pain, that now becomes an aspect of what we are and not all of what we are, right? It's something like if let's say we got a cut on a part of the body, we can still feel pain, right? There might even be a problem with functioning of that part of the body. If there's too much pain until it heals, we might not be able to use that part of the body. However, generally, if it's not a huge wound, it doesn't really affect us as much, right? It's not that there's no pain. It's not that there's not that there's no change in function, but that there's a broader context to what we are that puts the context of that cut in context, in a broader frame. And this is the exact same with the second mind. So there are innumerable feelings to be felt, right? And certainly things are coming up all the time. Things are happening in the world all the time. Look at all the events that are happening in the world right now. And when the sense of identity has broadened and opened up, then these experiences, while they may be overwhelming, they are just a fraction of what the experience is. They're just a fraction of what we are. And that makes all the difference in the world because we can still feel sadness, and yet there's a broader expanse in which this sadness experienced, in which the sadness comes and goes. Okay, and because of that, the very experience of pain and the experience of suffering changes because the entire attention of the mind is not only on that, right? We know that when we focus on something, it increases in our awareness, right? In fact, that's what focus is. We are bringing our awareness to a particular center. So in this case, if the awareness has expanded beyond the individual mind or body, then that experience of pain and suffering and overwhelm also changes. Not that it completely disappears, but it's in a much broader context. Okay, and then there are 4 questions here which I'm going to read together. Rather than addressing them one by one, I'll just speak to them generally. And these are about the different things that can happen in the second mind. So one is, what is the relation of meditation with the crown chakra? Right, so the chakras are the yogic centers of energy, we can call them, that are associated with the physical structure and associated with the psyche. And the crown chakra is located near the crown of the head. And so the question is, what is the relation of meditation with that? Okay, the next question, when we are more aware, what exciting things can we do? What do you believe is occurring when individuals are channeling? And is our second mind connected to our higher self? All right. So these 4 questions, I grouped them because they're speaking about different kinds of experiences. In terms of the crown chakra and meditation, in meditation, what can happen? What is meditation? It's a form of introspection when we become more and more aware of what we are. It's a very simple way to say what meditation is. There is an increasing, ever increasing awareness of what we are and how that relates to the world. Now, in terms of the mechanisms within the body, the chakras are 7 centers of energy. And as in meditation, as our introspection deepens and as the awareness changes, we can become aware of the activity of these different centers. Okay? And each center has a state of balance, just like your blood pressure has a state of balance. There's a particular blood pressure that works for your body. There's a particular pH that works for your body. It's always in a state of balance. All right? And so just like that, the chakras themselves, these centers of activity, have a state of balance, right? They're always in a state of flux and always balancing. They're always balancing. So in meditation, what can happen with introspection is we can become aware of these activities. It can be a subtle sensations. It's different for everyone, how they become aware of it. And as we become aware of it and release traumas, release emotions, and open up more and more, and this process can occur across all the chakras, including the crown chakra. Each chakra is related to a particular aspect of anatomy and physiology and opening up. And so the crown chakra is one of those that's associated specifically with transcendence. Okay, so that's the relationship. When we are more aware, what exciting things can we do? So this probably refers to many different things. There's something called siddhis in the yogic literature that talks about the abilities of the human being. Suffice it to say that as we open up into more and more of what we are, we unleash our creativity, we unleash our insight, and we unleash our abilities. And in the second mind, where the identity is not restricted to the body and the personal mind, anything is possible. So rather than go through a list, I would say anything is possible. And let me also speak to what exciting things we can do. See, this natural unfoldment of a person is not really about an excitement. It is the first mind that is looking for excitement, right? It's the first mind that looks for excitement. It's not the second mind that's looking for excitement. The second mind rests as itself and it expresses as itself. The first mind, maybe because it's bored or maybe because it's frustrated or for any other reason, starts to look for special kinds of abilities or unique things so that they can be exciting, right? And this is something to be cautious about because this can just start this endless loop of looking for things, looking for experiences, looking for, out-of-body experiences or whatever experiences a person are looking for. The purpose of all this, the purpose of the three minds, the purpose of self-awareness, the purpose of introspection is simply to see more and more of what we are. That is it. It's to see more and more of what we are. In so doing, everything else happens. Healing happens, right? In seeing what we are, I recognize, oh, what I thought was this, what I experienced with it was this, but now I'm seeing the world and myself totally differently. Even this word I and what it means is different. And this in itself is a healing. And from this recognition come the insights about the world, about anything else, including the unleashing of the abilities of the human being. All of those are secondary. And what is primary is the simple joy and the simple freedom of seeing oneself and seeing the nature of this. Right? And channeling is another one of those things that can happen as the mind opens up. Sometimes it's actually happening. Are there other beings? Yes, there are other beings. Not every being has a body. However, that doesn't mean that everyone who says they're channeling is channeling, right? The mind is very powerful. The mind can imagine things. The mind can project things. So what's real and what is unreal can become difficult to tell. So again, it's not about any particular ability. It's simply about recognizing all things are possible and staying with our own experience of what we are and not looking for something else that is exciting. And is our second mind connected to our higher self? Depends on what we mean here by the higher self. Many people talk about a soul, a deeper aspect of what we are that emerges and expresses as a particular body and personality. Yes, in this sense, the second mind is connected. The higher self is an aspect of this second mind. Right? This consciousness, which is here, which appears as all kinds of bodies, as subtle bodies, as gross bodies, as individual minds, all of these. This consciousness, part of that also is what we're calling here a higher self. Okay? Some of the other questions we'll get to after we explore the third mind, because I think that'll make more sense in that context. Let's pause here and bring our awareness to the foreground. And now the words are starting up again. The thoughts might be starting up again. Okay, notice this transition from the silence, from the awareness that is in the foreground. Notice now how thoughts start to populate your awareness, including the thought of a body or the experience of a body. It's all right here. So what is the third mind? Can we even talk about the third mind? The third mind is consciousness itself. What we might say is undifferentiated consciousness. Some might say pure consciousness. Consciousness prior to form. Let's keep the awareness in the foreground. Consciousness prior to form. When you look at an ocean, you might see waves, big and small. When you look at the beach, you might see waves washing up on the beach. You may see foam. And yet, what is that wave and even that ocean? There is only water. No matter how many waves are happening, no matter what the sea is doing, no matter the tide, there is only water. Remove the water, all waves disappear. Why just the waves? The entire ocean disappears. The play between the ocean and the waves is what we call oneness. The ocean is one, waves are many. This is oneness, where the multiplicity of the world of forms is dissolving in consciousness. This describes the second mind. Right? Just this part, what I'm talking about, is the second mind. The ocean of consciousness that is here, appearing as this world of forms, is the openness, the oneness of the second mind, the intimate connection of the one and the many. But now ask this ocean and all of these waves, are they anything other than water? No water, no wave. No water, no ocean itself. Right? Without the waves, the ocean can survive. Right? Ocean can survive without waves, but the ocean cannot survive without water, because the ocean is water appearing in a particular way. This water, then, is the third mind. Just relax the thoughts. Bring your awareness to the foreground. The third mind is no mind. The third mind is no mind. Beyond the world of form, beyond the world of function. It is you. When this you, when this I, they're both the same thing here, whether we call it you, I, it's nameless. When this you sees itself incompletely, or sees itself in a state of activity, the world appears. So the third mind, now in a state of flux. Now the world starts appearing and disappearing. This is the second mind. Forms are constructing and deconstructing. Functions are happening and defunctioning. Right? The boundaries are loose. The boundaries are ever changing. We know that. We know the body is always changing. We know that there's no, if you look at the edge of your skin, we know that there's no hard boundary there. Because of our perception being a particular way, it appears as though there's a distinct boundary. But when we zoom in, that solidness, that line disappears. Skin cells coming and going, right? Fields of energy. Where's the boundary? So this fluxing boundary is that second mind. When it hardens and becomes distinct, it's the first mind. Beyond all boundaries is this no mind. That is the third mind. And here we say, consciousness alone is. This is a totally baffling and confusing statement from the perspective of the first mind, because the first mind is adamant about the external, independent world of objects. And it simply cannot accept that consciousness is primary, because for the first mind, consciousness is somewhere in the head. And so for the first mind, all of this will be purely theoretical, or at least some of it, especially the third mind, will just be a wild idea. Right? How well does the wave know what water is? If you look at the root of a wave, you can see the wave that takes off from the ocean, right? The root of that wave is the ocean, right? The wave is connected at its root to the ocean. So the wave can relax itself and begin to notice, what I am arising in is this ocean of awareness as it moves into its root. But how far does that wave have to go to know water? How far does a wave have to go to know water? Right? It doesn't have to go anywhere. It's simply a shift in identity. That which I am, through and through, 100%, is that consciousness itself. Which consciousness? Not that consciousness in meditation. Not that consciousness in the book. Not that consciousness in an idea. This consciousness, here, always here. Let's take a pause, bring the awareness back. Keep relaxing. So these three minds, the third mind, in which there is no world to speak of. There are no thoughts to speak of. The third mind itself, in the state of activity, is what we experience as the second mind. Yeah? The third mind itself, in the state of flux, is what is experienced as the second mind. The second mind, as it contracts down and its awareness narrows to only that awareness of the individual, right? That broad awareness narrows and constricts to only that awareness of the individual. That is experienced as the first mind. So where are the three minds? Right here. Right now. Right now, everything is here. And depending on the configuration of the mind, what is here is experienced differently. Right? This is a key and subtle point. Okay? Everything is here. What here? Not here in this room which I'm in. Not here in this room which your body is in. Everything is here in this awareness. Which awareness? Not this awareness which appears to be in the head. Not this awareness even which is appearing as this body, localizing here, the out-of-body experience. Not even that awareness. This awareness that is beyond all notions of inside the body and outside the body and inside the mind, and outside the mind and physical and mental, all of these constructs, all of these species of experience are here. Meditation is fantastic, and you don't have to be in a particular state of meditation to recognize this. It is here. Yes, as the mind becomes more meditative, what does it mean to say the mind is becoming meditative? It simply means it's shifting configurations from this first mind to this second mind orientation and beyond. That's it. It's all about the boundary. It's all about the boundary. Whether you're talking about spirituality, whether you're talking about religion, whether you're talking about this world of objects, whether you're talking about physics, it's all about the boundary. And the primary boundary comes from one's own mental configuration. Let's take a pause here. Bring your awareness, your radiant awareness, to the foreground. So let's look at some of these other questions that were asked. Okay? And as we start to do this, note how the concepts start to arrive. Map the concepts to your own experience. Okay, so one question was, can the first, second, and third mind operate simultaneously? And this we answered already, right? We addressed this already. The third mind, consciousness undifferentiated, in the state of flux, is appearing as the second mind, which when constricted feels like an individual body, feels like a localization and a limitation within the body, right? So what is here right now is consciousness itself. We only experience what is here differently. So the experience can be of a first mind, the experience can be of the second mind, and the recognition as the third mind itself. That doesn't change what fundamentally is. Just like the ocean may be the biggest ocean like the Pacific, it may be the smallest ocean. There may be thousands of waves or no waves. There may be huge waves and small waves, and it is all water. Water exists, period. And it can be experienced as an ocean of oneness and an ocean of multiplicity and as one particular wave, right? So consciousness is here as the third mind. It is experienced differently based on the approach and the configuration. How to live in the second mind at the practical level? A great question, right? So practically, how does the identity remain as the second mind rather than going back? Remember last time we spent some time on this. We called it the transition zone. What is the transition zone? It is when that boundary seems to be fluctuating. Oh, I see it. I get it. I lost it. I don't get it. I'm frustrated. I got to get back to that. Oh, I see it. I get it. Oh, I lost it. This kind of transition zone, right? when we bring attention to the sense of boundary around the first mind, to the sense of limitation, to the feeling of limitation, in order to do that, a deeper intelligence has to be summoned, right? I don't mean that we call that intelligence, saying, I want that intelligence to come and all this. No, not like that. But simply to notice the boundary of the first mind, right? Simply to notice that a greater intelligence has to come into play. So the key here in staying as the second mind is to recognize this sense of limitation. It can actually be counterintuitive. It can be counterintuitive because the idea is that first mind wants to be great, right? That first mind wants to get bigger and expand and experience fantastic things. And yet that's not the fundamental mechanism. That's not how it works. What happens is that that limitation starts to crack. That boundary starts to crack and be seen through. It's not that the first mind just gets bigger, is that it is seen through. So what can be an effective way? One thing that can work is to place attention on the feeling of limitation itself without judgment. Place attention on that feeling of limitation, because the very ability to do that brings in a greater intelligence. Which greater intelligence? The intelligence of the second mind that is already you right now. It is already here, it is already available. And when we bring attention to our limitation and are able to sit with that, that limitation starts to dissolve. Okay, this can be very challenging. And for some, it can be traumatic because there are so many experiences that are making up that outline of limitation. Experiences from childhood, from other lifetimes, from yesterday, from a few minutes ago. There are all kinds of experiences that are solidifying this boundary. All right? So the ability to recognize this boundary and sit with this boundary also means that some of these experiences are going to start coming up. So be gentle with yourself. Find someone to talk to. Right? There's a process to it. Be gentle. Okay? You can visit my website, anoopkumar.com. There's a little bit more on this. And we can also work together if you wish. There's a section for personal consultations. The key is be gentle with yourself. Trying to do everything at once can lead to instability. Okay? So those are the main points. I also want to touch briefly, we have a few minutes left. I want to touch briefly on what we call mental illness. All right? I say this because I received a lot of messages about this in the last week. Right? What we are talking about here is a complete reorientation in some ways to what life is and what the world is. And going through this process by nature is destabilizing, right? What does it mean when the sense of identity shifts? That's the very essence of destabilization. There's nothing that could make a person less stable than a shift in the sense of identity, right? So I say this because it's important to recognize that we're talking about deep changes and powerful changes. And it's important to get help from the right people. If you're having a very difficult time, right? Get help from the right people. That's important. Okay? That can be friends. That can be a mental health professional. There are a range of mental health professionals, some of whom recognize this perspective, right? Especially those who are familiar with transpersonal psychology. So make sure you are working with the right people and getting help professionally if that's needed. Okay? Because we are talking about deep changes. Everybody experiences destabilization with this because that is at the root of what we're talking about. I'm simply giving words and naming what is happening and what happens. You can also, if you go to my YouTube channel, there's a recent conversation I did with a psychotherapist on redefining or reimagining what we mean by mental disorder. All of this starts coming into play. And I'll be having a conversation with a psychiatrist as well sometime in the next couple of weeks, which will be on that channel. So check that out there as well. So make sure you have the right support to go through the process, right? Which you? The first mind. The first mind, in some cases, needs that support as things start to change dramatically, right? Not only because of the nature of the destabilization, but because the stories we have in society are generally extremely narrow. And so it can make it even more difficult to go through this process. Let's bring our awareness back now. Here's a quote about the second mind by Max Planck, who was the originator of quantum theory and was a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. He says, "As a man who has devoted his whole life to the most clear-headed science to the study of matter, I can tell you, as a result of my research about atoms, this much. There is no matter as such. This mind is the matrix of all matter." Nobel Prize-winning physicist, talking about the second mind. This mind, this consciousness, is the matrix of all matter. All that we call matter is the forming and deforming and informing of this second mind. Gaudapada was Shankaracharya's teacher's teacher. So Shankaracharya is a poet-philosopher of ancient India, lived around 800 AD, wrote some amazing commentaries and insights into Advaita Vedanta, or non-duality. His teacher's teacher said this, which gives an indication of the third mind. He said, "The world of duality, which is perceived to exist and is characterized by the subject-object relationship, is a movement of the mind." The world of duality is a movement of the mind, to paraphrase. Which world of duality? Me and you. This and that. Here and there. I and this screen in front of me. This duality is itself a movement of the mind, or what I call a configuration of the mind. Just like a pretzel is a configuration of a breadstick, right? A long breadstick, twisted up in a particular way, in a particular configuration, and now we call it a pretzel. Why is it not a breadstick? Only because of the configuration. It looks different. Similarly, the mind, in a particular configuration where it polarizes, is this first mind, is this movement. All right? And when this undoes itself, when the pretzel unpretzels itself, as it loosens the second mind vision, and as it completely straightens out, meaning what? The pretzel dissolves. There's no pretzel there anymore. That is this no mind of the third mind. So we've done 3 episodes now on the 3 minds. The first, relatively brief. The second, more in depth. And the third one, I hope we explored some of the subtleties of this, right? It is not just a theory. It is a direct description of what you are and how what you are relates to the world that is perceived. Okay, so send me your questions. Check out the website, anoopkumar.com. There's more on there. And if you'd like further clarifications in depth, feel free to sign up for a consultation and we can dive in deeper. Everyone perceives this a little bit differently. We take it in a little bit differently. I look forward to speaking with you. Next week, we're going to begin a new series called Is This a Dream? It's based on this book. And this is a book I wrote a few years ago, but it just got published just a few months ago, actually, this year. So it's called Is This a Dream? Reflections on the Awakening Mind. And Deepak was kind enough to write the foreword to this book. And it's a short book, 115 pages, and it is packed. It is nutrient dense, we might say. All right? So just a couple pages. There are quite a few insights packed in there. So we will start this next week. The book is available on Amazon, Kindle and paperback. Please do get a copy, and then we can start going through this. I'll just tell you the 3 parts to this book, the contents. There are 3 parts. The first part is called You're Not Who You Think You Are, and there are several chapters there. Part 2 is called The World Isn't What You Think It Is, and part 3 is called The Many Masks of Non-Duality. Non-duality can appear in many ways. So we will begin this exploration. Is this a dream? Next Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time or 3 p.m. Pacific Time. Please do keep sending the questions. I will take a look at some of these maybe today, otherwise during the ensuing week, and I will try to respond to as many as I can to clarify this even further. And then maybe we'll do this regularly, where at the top of the show, we will simply talk about some of the questions that might yield the most insights. Let's now bring what's most important to the forefront. Let's enjoy each other. Thank you for coming. Check out anoopkumar.com. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll see you next week.